Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had a fantastic Thanksgiving, filled with great food, family, and of course, some much-needed relaxation. As we ease into the holiday season, there's one story that has dominated the headlines this week, and it's one that reveals just how out of touch former President Donald Trump can be when it comes to international diplomacy. This week, Trump made headlines for all the wrong reasons once again, after making bold claims about the actions of Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo. In a stunning display of political bluster, Trump announced on social media that Sheinbaum had agreed to close Mexico's southern border in an effort to curb the flow of migrants into the United States. The only problem? Mexico's president immediately shot down his claims, making it clear that not only had Trump misrepresented the conversation, but that such an agreement was never even on the table. What followed was a rare public rebuke of Trump from a foreign leader, one that should send shockwaves through both U.S. politics and the international stage. In this video, we'll break down what happened during Trump's phone call with President Sheinbaum, explore the implications of his false claims, and discuss how this episode highlights serious issues with Trump's approach to foreign policy. We'll also examine the consequences of his proposed tariffs on Mexico, which could have devastating impacts on the American economy and relations with our neighbors to the south. Trump's claims, a false narrative. On Wednesday, just 2 days after Donald Trump made headlines with his announcement that he would be imposing 25% tariffs on Mexico unless the country took drastic action to curb migration, Trump boasted about a phone conversation with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. According to Trump, the call had gone exceedingly well, with Sheinbaum agreeing to close Mexico's southern border to prevent migrants from passing through the country into the United States. Trump's words on social media painted a picture of a major diplomatic victory. He claimed she agreed to close the southern border. No more migrants coming through. This is a huge win for America. In typical Trump fashion, he positioned himself as the great dealmaker, presenting this supposed agreement as yet another example of his prowess in foreign affairs. However, President Sheinbaum wasted no time in debunking Trump's narrative. Within hours, she took to social media to publicly correct the record. She clarified that while the two had indeed had an excellent conversation, there was no agreement to close the southern border. In fact, Sheinbaum reiterated that Mexico's position was clear. The country would not close its borders, but instead would focus on maintaining strong diplomatic ties and fostering cooperation between the two nations. The president of Mexico's response was swift and direct. She said, "Our position remains the same. We do not intend to close the borders. We will continue to maintain bridges between governments and people, not walls." This was a direct contradiction to Trump's claims, which quickly became a point of embarrassment for the former president and a clear indication of his disregard for facts when it comes to foreign diplomacy. The implications of Trump's false claims. Trump's false claims about the phone call with President Sheinbaum are not just embarrassing, they are deeply troubling. His cavalier approach to foreign relations, coupled with his willingness to lie about diplomatic conversations, could have serious consequences for U.S. foreign policy moving forward. First and foremost, this episode highlights the danger of Trump's America First rhetoric and his tendency to make grandiose claims without fully understanding the complexities of international relations. His brash assertions, which often rely on misinformation and exaggeration, are not only counterproductive but also damaging to the credibility of the United States on the world stage. When Trump falsely claims that a foreign leader has agreed to policies that they have explicitly rejected, it undermines trust and cooperation between the two countries. In this case, Mexico's president had no choice but to publicly correct Trump, which, while necessary, is deeply humiliating for the U.S. The last thing a world power like the United States should want is to be publicly rebuked by its neighbors, especially on social media. The fact that a foreign leader feels compelled to call out the President of the United States on a public platform speaks volumes about the diplomatic dysfunction that has plagued Trump's time in office and is likely to continue if he were to return to the White House. Moreover, Trump's claim that Mexico had agreed to close the border was not only factually incorrect but also politically dangerous. By making such a sweeping assertion, Trump not only misled the American public, but he also placed immense pressure on the Mexican government to do something they had no intention of doing. This could have escalated tensions between the two countries, further harming the relationship between the U.S. and Mexico at a time when cooperation is needed more than ever. Trump's proposed tariffs. Economic fallout. One of the key components of Trump's recent foreign policy threats involves the imposition of tariffs on Mexico. Trump has insisted that unless Mexico takes drastic action to stop the flow of migrants, he will impose a 25% tariff on Mexican goods, which he claims will force the country to act. The problem with this approach is multifaceted. First, it ignores the reality that tariffs do not achieve the desired results without significant consequences. If Trump follows through on these tariffs, American consumers will be the ones to bear the brunt of the cost. Tariffs on Mexican goods would result in higher prices for everyday items, from cars and electronics to food and clothing. In essence, Trump's solution to a complex immigration issue would ultimately harm the very people he claims to be protecting, the American public. But beyond the economic impact, Trump's proposed tariffs would also violate his own USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. The USMCA, which Trump himself championed and signed into law, was intended to improve trade relations between the three countries. Yet by threatening tariffs on Mexico, Trump would be actively undermining the agreement he worked so hard to secure. This would not only damage relations with Mexico, but also weaken the broader trade framework he had promised would benefit the United States. In addition, Trump's tariffs would likely spark retaliation from Mexico, further escalating tensions between the two countries. Mexican officials have already indicated that they would fight back against any tariffs imposed by the United States, which could result in a trade war that would harm both countries. For Trump to pursue this path, knowing the economic fallout it would bring, shows just how little regard he has for the well-being of ordinary Americans or the health of the U.S. economy. The international response, Mexico's pushback and global perception. This situation with Mexico is not an isolated incident. It serves as a stark reminder of how poorly Trump handled international relations during his presidency and how little respect he commanded from foreign leaders. Throughout his time in office, Trump repeatedly embarrassed the United States on the world stage by alienating allies and making unsubstantiated claims about foreign leaders. What's significant here is that it wasn't just a foreign government speaking out against Trump's false claims. It was Mexico, a country with which the United States has a long and complicated relationship. Mexico's president did not hesitate to set the record straight, and in doing so, demonstrated that Trump's brand of diplomacy, built on bravado, threats, and misinformation, is no longer effective in the modern world. Other world leaders have already begun to take note of Trump's approach to foreign policy. If Trump were to return to the White House in 2025, countries around the globe will likely adopt a more cautious and confrontational stance toward the U.S., understanding that any promises made by Trump are subject to change, and that his word cannot always be trusted. This will only further isolate the United States and reduce its standing on the global stage. The fallout from Donald Trump's false claims about his conversation with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum is a testament to the dysfunction, misinformation, and dangerous brinkmanship that characterized much of Trump's time in office. In this case, it was Mexico that had to correct the record and put Trump in his place, but this is not a sustainable way for the United States to maintain its foreign relations. Trump's approach to foreign policy has never been rooted in diplomacy or mutual respect. It has been about making bold, often misleading claims and threatening to impose tariffs and sanctions on countries that do not fall in line with his vision of America first. This may work in the short term for Trump's political base, but it's disastrous in the long term for the global standing of the United States. If Trump returns to the White House, it is clear that we can expect more of the same. A reckless, self-serving approach to foreign relations that puts the American people at risk of higher prices, damaged relationships, and global isolation. As citizens, we must hold our leaders accountable for their words and actions. We must demand honesty, transparency, and diplomacy in our dealings with other countries, because as we've seen this week, the cost of diplomatic blunders can be very high, both at home and abroad. Thank you for joining me for today's breakdown of the border bluster debunked. Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth analysis and commentary on the latest political developments. Let's keep pushing for a better future, where facts matter and diplomacy is at the heart of our foreign policy.